Okay, in this last section of Module 5, I'm just going to really quickly talk about atherosclerosis, a part of cardiovascular disease. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this at all because actually um, arteriosclerosis and atherosclerosis are both two conditions that have more or less of an origin in oxidation and free radical damage, and those topics we will discuss later on in the semester. So I will be revisiting this, but what I do want to talk about is just very briefly what role fats do play in heart disease and particularly plaque development within your blood vessels. Most of the time, we're really led to believe that fats are pretty much the cause of heart disease. And I think you guys should have a pretty good understanding now, if you have read through everything, that fats are not the cause of heart disease. As we will see in just a minute here, actually damage to blood vessels. In fact, I'll just go ahead and I'll tell you. Um, Damage to blood vessels more than anything. I have a green cursor here if you guys can see that. This is the inside of the blood vessel. This portion here, right here is the lining of the blood vessel. So this would be like the walls of the cell. What usually happens when atherosclerosis begins, which is like plaque development, there has to be some kind of damage that happened to the blood vessel wall. We'll talk about the areas of damage and how that damage occurs later on in another lesson. That's where I said oxidation comes into fact. Smoking, a high sugar intake, a high processed food diet, trans fats, that would be another one. High blood pressure. Oh, it's just a whole bunch of things. Not getting enough cholesterol, even not having a good firm foundation of a cell wall. All of these play into risks for getting some kind of damage done to the cell wall. But ultimately, what I want you to remember is that plaque development doesn't just happen because you happen to eat fats. We've been eating fats for centuries. Mankind has always needed fats, but we've not always had heart disease. So fats are not the problem. The problem is that our blood vessels are getting damaged today. We've never had damaged blood vessels. Now we have damaged blood vessels galore. Our cells are just not healthy. And because they're not healthy, they're getting damaged. So that is the foundation of plaque development. What happens is it's a lot like when you get a scab on your knee. Okay, let's say you fall down on your driveway, you get a scab on your knee. The scab that develops is a protective device. Okay, your body does that so that it can protect the surface that's been damaged, and then underneath that surface, it starts working to heal. So you have all kinds of inflammatory factors that come to the area, cells that is, that come and rush to that area, and they start fixing stuff. They start fixing the skin cells, they start fixing the blood vessels that might have been damaged, they start fixing just everything that goes into building skin back up. And while that whole process is going on, that scab stays on there. Okay, it needs to protect that surface from bacteria and viruses and all kinds of nasty stuff getting in there, dirt. So it's there for a reason. Well, in your blood vessels, the exact same thing happens. Something damages your blood vessel, and so it's got to scab up. And so the question is, how in the world do we scab it all up? Well, this is what happens. Watch my green cursor again here. If you notice in this area right here, it says inflammation. Inflammatory cells start rushing to the area right away. And we already learned, or you guys have already read in the last section, which I realize it was a huge section. Hopefully you took a couple days and broke it down. But inflammatory cells come from arachidonic acid. That comes from red meat, to some degree poultry, not nearly as much as in red meat, but red meat, poultry, eggs to some degree too, and dairy. Okay, so all of those things contribute to this type of fat called arachidonic acid, which builds up inflammatory cells. So as you can see, these blue cells all up around here, these are all inflammatory cells, and there's a whole bunch of them that rush to the area to try to fix the area. But what happens is they squeeze, like this one you can see, it squeezes in between the cells. It kind of gets underneath because it's going to try to fix some things underneath as well. However, while it's there, it's got to eat. Okay, and we call these cells, are part of your immune system too, we call them monocytes. So this thing up here, this is just a blown up version of it. It's a monocyte, and you can see here where it's squeezing between the cell walls to get underneath the cell wall too, to start fixing the damage. Okay, so what happens is these things have to eat while they're in the process of fixing the damage to the cell wall. So if you look at this chart down here, the blue cells again are the inflammatory cells. Um, you can see right here, the LDL is coming in. These guys basically feed off of LDL, that's bad cholesterol. So all up along here, here's your LDL again, and it's coming down, and all these little yellow droplets are coming and rushing to the area as well. And you can see right here specifically how the inflammatory cells, or your immune cells, are literally engulfing the LDL. As it engulfs the LDL, as this picture down here shows, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. These things pig out on LDL. It's like all they can think of eating is fat. And so they literally just suck up all this LDL and they start blowing up. They get obese themselves. So as they blow up and they get fat, then you start developing all of this stuff right here. This is plaque. So I hope you just caught this. Plaque is nothing more than inflammatory cells that have rushed to an area of damage and have basically engorged themselves on LDL cholesterol. That's why we consider LDL cholesterol bad, is because we're sitting here saying, oh, it's feeding all of our cells, it's developing plaque. But a couple things here. First of all, even if you got rid of the LDL, so you're not feeding them, but the damage is still there. So that's, again, it's not really getting to the heart of atherosclerosis. It's just simply trying to eliminate one aspect of it. The other thing that this does not show is that I had talked about, or I discussed in the last section of this module, LDL in a natural fat is quite large, really. And as it's coming down along here, it does not feed these cells when it's really large. These inflammatory cells like small damaged LDL, and this is what we'll discuss in a later module too. How do these things get damaged? They get damaged by free radicals, oxidation basically in the body. And so what it does is it breaks them down into these very small particles of LDL. The small oxidized damaged particles of LDL fit in between the cells right here where you can see, and then they get eaten by the inflammatory cells. So inflammatory cells can't eat big LDL. So again, LDL by itself isn't even the problem. It's damaged, oxidized LDL. And the very same factors that damage the LDL is the very same thing that damaged the blood vessel lining in the first place anyways. So that damage and that oxidation, again, is at the heart of heart disease and plaque development. Fats play a role, but fats are not the cause. And that's what I want you guys to see, because that's important. That's where the lies come in America. We've just been so drilled into thinking, you know, fats are the problem. Fats create plaque. If you eat too much fat, you're going to get plaque in your blood vessels. That's not really the case. And hopefully you guys can see that. I don't think there's anything else in this picture I want to discuss. Like I said, we will get back to this again in a later module. If you have specific questions about heart disease and about this whole process, or really anything in the last section, I realize that was a huge section. There's a lot of terminology. There's a lot to discuss. Fats are important. They're very misunderstood. Please, please, please feel free to email me. You can ask me direct questions, maybe ask others in the forum too, and we can kind of create a conversation on it. Otherwise, if you guys did understand it, great. I mean, that was my goal. I certainly hope that came across. So we will move on then to the next section in proteins, and we will, like I said, discuss this a little bit later. Thanks for listening.